Well, so here we are before one of the greatest buildings of all times, and no doubt the most famous monument in Barcelona. That, as you know, is called Sagrada Familia, the Holy Family, because it is dedicated to one of these role models that in this new wave of Christianization, the church was bringing forward for the people to imitate, to be such a good family as the Holy Family that they were Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. As also was common in the times to dedicate churches to Joseph, for example, the best father of all times, so for the fathers to imitate the very good behavior of this man. And let's put in context, historical, socio-political context, this church that it's a modern church, despite has some shapes that they put it in contact with historical styles like Gothic, this verticality, this sharpness, and even some windows like pointed arches, or even Romanesque. There is also round arches, Baroque, especially here with this view of this upper crown decoration, as it would be a kind of celebration of the church, Baroque. Despite it, it's very modern, especially as we keep walking around. You will see how Gaudí was really inventing a new type of church. But before, as we said, let's put it in context. It is 1881 when they put the first stone. Good to remember that the first architect was not Gaudí himself, but it was another architect, Francesc de la Paula i el Vilar, that his plan, that actually he began in the crypt, it was much more conventional. Conventional as they were the rest of the churches being built in this time, that they were not creating a new style, but they were copying and reviving all styles, like New Gothic, New Romanesque, New Byzantine, sometimes a mix of all of them, trying to make something new, original, the so-called eclecticism, all in the movement or in the period that has been called historicism. But this first architect, he had an argument with the construction board. Then he resigned because he was asking for very expensive marmor, stones, and the construction board, that they are still the association or the group in charge of taking the decisions, contracting the architects, and taking the decisions of the styles. No, for example, a column they don't know how to do, and they have a small piece that Gaudí left in a small plaster. So they say, well, we think that multiplying it 10 times 25 times. The final shape should be like this. They have been quite faithful to the original plan of Gaudí because apart of some plans, paper, he also made many pieces on cardboard or in plaster, and that has been the main job of the architects since he died, Gaudí, 1926. To take these small pieces, but they are not so small. They are sometimes 1 meter, 2 meters high, and to build it real in stone and much larger. So as the construction board, that they are the decision makers, but ultimately it's the Archbishop of Barcelona, because this church is in Barcelona and belongs to the Archbishopric of Barcelona, that is like a good part of Catalonia, and ultimately even to the Pope. If the Pope said, look, I don't like this church, I don't want you to make mass, so they could continue building it, but they couldn't make mass. But yeah, the Junta Constructora de la Sagrada Familia, the construction board of the Holy Family, Sagrada Familia, they are the decision makers. And then, after 2 years of beginning, by 83, so this architect resigned because this construction board, they had not much money. Always this church has been an atonement church, templa expiatory. That means that out of alms that the believers or the tourists nowadays, they pay for the entrance, or before they were putting some money in a kind of groove, in a kind of opening, or sometimes the members of the construction board or even Gaudí himself. On Sunday, he went to this neighborhood asking for some alms. So never has been. Well, now it's quite plenty. They have a great budget. Now in these times of spring, early summit of this crisis of COVID, it has been closed for many months. So they have a problem of budget for some months until they recover the number of visits they used to have. And when they began this church, 1881, they don't have any budget at all. Only they enjoy a very good donation, anonymous, of great patron who gave a lot of money to buy this plot of land. That in the times it was relatively cheap because it was quite in the outskirts of Barcelona. Nowadays it's quite in the center of Barcelona because from this time onwards and until even nowadays, still Barcelona keeps growing, but in the times it was very outside of the center, and that's why they could afford to buy here this plot of land. And yeah, as we were commenting, because this argument with the first architect, they had to enroll a new one. They found a very young and talented architect with very bright ideas, and already with some experience, but in small projects, that was Antoni Gaudí y Cornet from Reus, from the south of Catalonia. Two biographical notes that they will help us to understand better this figure, this genius of all times, this Mozart of architecture, this God's architect, is that when he was a child, he was often ill, he couldn't go to school, and in order not to get bored in the countryside house, the parents, he was very closely observing nature, how the leaves they keep opening without bothering themselves to catch as much sun as possible for all of them, the bodies of the insects, the skeletons, these kind of things. So he was closely examining nature, and then when he was an adult, with the help of maths, geometry, then he was making this very surprising architecture that has a lot of organisms with these warped surfaces that later we will analyze in more detail. And the other biographical note that will help us to understand why he was so different from other architects, and actually he was commenting it, these biographical notes to some of his colleagues and admirers, it was that his parents, his grandparent, grandfather, father, grandfather, grandfather, even more rare, they were coppersmiths to make stills for the distillation. The southern part of Catalonia, Reus, in the hinterland a bit, it's a great production of wine. And in these times, as still nowadays they do it, the spare wine that is of not so much quality or when there is a great production, it was dedicated to Barnet. And as you know, with the distillation, like the stills of the whiskey, distilleries, so they get more pure alcohol. And to make the steel, so you need many sections of flat copper, and then with nails and beating it, curving it a bit, making it warp, and all together making a very warped steel. So at the end, they get the steel. So the coppersmiths, out of a two-dimension, a flat square, rectangle, assembling it with fire with hammer, they get the three dimensions. So Gaudi used to say that he had it somehow in his DNA, this attitude and this third eye to see the three dimensions, not in a kind of parallelepiped way, a cubic way, but in a more natural, warp, organic form. When he took this job, that he was quite young, like 30 years, he was combining it with many other projects like Casa Batlló, Casa Calvet, Casa Milà, La Pedrera, Parkway. But then the last 15 years of his life, as he saw he was getting older and he had this opera magna, his very beloved church, and he realized he couldn't finish it in his lifetime. So he wanted to get ready as much as possible for the future generations of architects that still it is under construction. As you can see, many people for many years, many decades, they were making jokes on this church because it seemed a never-ending story. But actually, now, thanks to the many visits, there now has been a break, but hopefully we'll recover the many visits. That means great budget. Lately, in the last years, it was a budget of 35 million euros, which that allowed to go very quickly, much quicker as it was for many decades in the times of Gaudí, and then it was also a long break of the 20s crisis, civil war, after war, and then by 70s, 80s, especially 80s, and then with the boom of the tourism after the Olympic Games 92, it has been taking like the 5 year, and it is expected, or it was expected to be finished 2026, though, and now with this COVID crisis, maybe it will take a few more months. We will see soon. And yes, we were commenting the last 15 years of his life. He only dedicated all his design efforts and his thinking, overthinking, design and redesign the day after this will of making something perfect and improving what he had made or draw the day before, because he knew that if he was able to finish something, this frontal part that we are seeing, and on the right, the apse and a bit of the cloister that now we are going to see or to comment, then he knew that that could be a very good guideline to then to copy the towers, to copy this base of the cloister, and so on. And together with the planes and some of these plaster models, like the sacristy or a column or the ceiling kind of lanterns, that would be very helpful for the architects. And even the last year of his life, he was living in his workshop that was on the other side, in the opposite facade, dedicated to the Passion, the contrary of this one. This one is dedicated to the birth of Jesus, the Nativity. Therefore, it's also facing east, where the sun rises, and on the other side, with the sunset, is the end of this human life of Jesus Christ and the beginning of his new life to join the Trinity, the Father and the Holy Ghost. And as we were commenting the political context, it was that for some decades the church was losing some ground because always was very right winger and had this attitude to say, look, don't fight too much in earth, just be obedient and go to church and pray that you will get a better job or you will get better wages, but don't fight, make revolution. In heaven, everything will be better. So this sentence of Marx, religion is the opium of people. And that's why not only proletariat, working class, but even the middle class, for some times, were going away because they said, well, we want to change society. We want to get rid of these privileges of the upper class, the nobility, and the working class. Then also they wanted to have some rights, the right to vote, the woman also, they want to be equal as the men and so on. And as the church was very normally quite far right winger, so the people was going away. But then it was seen that by the middle class, that some of them they achieve a higher status, they turn into high class, the upper class, the dominant class, they realize that the church could appease the souls, no? And if they develop a program of schools, charity, these kind of things, then they could gain the social peace and to have under control these revolutionary trends of the masses. And in this context, so in Europe was again a kind of revival and rebirth of the church, not only the Catholic, but in many other confessions like Protestantism, lands, Evangelists, Calvinists, many new churches were built. But as we were saying, the typical official church style, whether Protestant lands or Catholic, was to make this kind of copies of medieval churches to pretend to be old while they were really new from late 19th, early 20th century. Well, you can see the stairs here. That is the basement where first the church was started by this first architect, not Gaudí himself. Then this first architect he was preparing the crypt, and then Gaudí also decided to dig a bit the surrounding area so for the light to better enter into the crypt and even through the main portal. It was built from the outside later. When we see some images of the inside, they use other stones, but outside, in the times of Gaudí, sandstone from Barcelona, still taken from a nearby hill, very close hill, Montjuic, that for centuries it was a stone quarry. And nowadays, the stone quarries of Barcelona, they are already closed, but they use a sandstone of other places with a very close, similar composition of quartz, feldspar, mica, and even the same nice rosa color. This part is quite dark because after 100 years that it was finished, so the pollution has stained it, but the original tone of the sandstone from here is much more like some of the figures that were placed later after Gaudí died. It has this nice rosa color out of quartz. Well, the church has two values: the architectural value, this very special new design, a new way to make a church from outside and also from inside, as we will see. But apart, Gaudí was very radical, very innovative in the way to fill the portal. Normally, for centuries, the portals they were quite hieratic placement and display of figures. like front of figures, standing looking ahead with not much movement and quite symmetrical, all close in niches, all the same height, same body, only differentiated by some of the attributes. This one with a cross, this one with a nave, this one with a palm leaf, but it was quite lifeless. Well, Gaudí said, let's take the tradition of the great Baroque, even Rococo altarpieces that you can see, for example, in Wien or in Baviera, or even in Italy, Bernini, all these Baroque that they like the twisting and they like the theatralism, like figures playing trumpets, and with this expansion theme. And Gaudí said, let's not hide it inside, let's show it outside. Because actually, in this late 19th century, we have a problem that the people, especially the working class or the main part of society, doesn't go much to church. And if we show them outside a piece of theater, stone theater, with this kind of dripping, as it would be flocks of snow, or water, these columns splitting the three entrances, crowned with palm leaves and supporting trumpet players. Probably they represent when these seraphims they call for the final judgment. And if we place above the Holy Family, that is surrounded by an explosion of life of all kinds, birds, farm animals, the true wise men of Orient bringing the presents, the shepherds of the area of Bethlehem bringing the presents to the Lord, and these angels in heaven playing such a nice concert because the Son of God has born. And then if we place left, right, when they brought the child to the baptism, the presentation in the temple, right, this young guy on a throne when he went to the synagogue when he was just 12, 13 years old. He escaped from home and then he went to talk and to dialogue, no, in such a erudite theological way with the most learned rabbis, and they were shocked. But this young guy, he knew so much about the Torah, the Talmud, all the top, under this kind of cave that is like the root, no, the base for a growing tree, a cypress tree, that would represent the tree of paradise, or the tree of life, so the crowning of Mary in the heavens. So all made in quite a realistic and naturalistic way. So the bodies as they are, and movement, show movement. Even Gaudí was using some skeletons, some mirrors, and he was playing with all these elements to then make the figures quite real. He was asking for some of the people working there, and then he was taking the mask of some of these workers, or sometimes he was sleeping animals with chloroform, and then quickly with plaster he was taking the negative, no, of the body. Or if he wanted to represent, for example, a very bad soldier of Herodotus that made the massacre of the innocents, if he saw a man that had a very fearful face, that so he asked him to let him draw, and so on. So all in this realistic, naturalistic way, double naturalistic because it's like nature, so the bodies, the birds, everything, not abstract, for example, or expressionist, or other trends, and apart double naturalistic because it's full of nature, as you can see. So this double value of the Sagrada Familia for the very different sculptural program or decorative program, and for the very new, shocking, eye-catching, expressive, organic architecture. Well, one could spend here hours and hours looking at the detail of the different figures, the different plants. Actually, there are plants from Catalonia, there are plants from Palestine, from Israel. There are plants also on the left-hand side from Egypt, like papyrus or some of these palm trees. So all related to the different moments of the infancy, the adolescence. Jesus Christ, for example, left his escape to Egypt when they were going with a donkey guided by the Archangel Gabriel. And together with the architecture, these kind of tubular bell towers that actually they are based in a parabol. So Gaudi was innovative not only in this very radical proposal for a portico with this theater of figures made in stone, but for example in the way to make the facade. Normally for centuries there used to be a kind of pediment or also rising two square towers or next to the apsis or sometimes in the front also octagonal towers as it can be seen by half an hour walking from here in the old town. But Gaudí invented or make for the first time a new type of tower that was based on a parable. So a jet of water running around his own axe, a parable of revolution, 360 degrees, and then he crowned it with a very original, also very shocking pinnacle, a way to finish a finial, a tower. For centuries they used to place crowns or crosses or a figure of the apostle. For example, these towers, like the ones in the other side and the ones in the south, they are dedicated to the apostles. So another architect to go quickly and to finish it as quickly as possible could have said, okay, so I place this apostle or this other apostle. But Gaudí had this idea that when you make the things common or typical, then nobody pays attention. While when you make something that makes sense and is also different, new, then the people is more captured, more eye catch by this new thing.